still work with engineers to put in the current. So I probably will just
Hello everyone, welcome to ASEF 2022. You are in the thematic track 1, policy reforms for energy transition. My name is Han Duo, and I am the track chair. Last year, ADB approved its new energy policy to support the low carbon transition in Asia and the Pacific. Also, at COP26, Glasgow Climate Pact and the Paris Rulebook were agreed on. Now, almost halfway in 2022, the world is moving forward and is acting on climate change. But we are facing new challenges. Currently, energy security and affordability are really concerning worldwide. Even in Australia, a resource-rich country, energy security and affordability are hot topics. We are talking about blackout, planned blackout, even in Australia. At this challenging time, we need policy reforms, and we want governments to manage a sustainable and just energy transition and lead us through unknown waters. This thematic track is for people to share their views, experience, and the debates about what are necessary to support the energy transition in the region. I want to thank all the authors who submitted abstracts. We received many quality submissions such that the selection was quite difficult, shall we say, because we have only limited slots for speakers and panelists. I do hope, however, that ASEF can consider other forms of sharing ideas and facilitating the debate in the future. Without taking more time in this session, we have 3 speakers and each has 10 minutes talking about their presentations. Then we will have a panel discussion. I'm not sure, Professor Shi, are you able to join us?
Yeah, probably Dr. Du, I probably will just give a quick opening and probably need your help to chair the session because my car is breakdown, still getting a mechanical engineer to help. I think, yeah, thanks for as if to invite me to moderate the sections.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Oh, you can hear me, right? Okay. Yeah. Okay, I don't know what's going on. You still cannot hear me, right? No. Okay, if you cannot hear me, probably I will skip. I think something is wrong. Yeah. Oh, then what's going on? Yeah. So I probably just a quick summary. I think, as we all know that more than 140 countries have committed to carbon neutrality. Most of them, I think 80% will concede by 2050. So in that sense that we have a quite definitely clear deadline for our fossil fuel industry. However, how to achieve that result will depend on the policy making as well as the private sector. So this kind of energy transition process is quite complicated and difficult. Even as actually Professor Duhan mentioned that for developed country and resource-rich country like Australia suffer from energy crisis. As that same thing happened same in the Europe and in the USA, which indicated the complexity and significance of energy transition roadmap or the process itself. This kind of particular energy transition challenge is particularly serious for our developing country in the Asia Pacific region. As you will hear the three presenters today, they probably tell you what are the challenge and the difficulty. The big problem for our developing country that they need to achieve carbon neutrality during the transition process and for economic growth, which create a lot of uncertainty, not just technology uncertainty, but economic and social uncertainty. For that reasons, I think we are very pleased to have three presenters talking about the case from Indonesia, Vietnam, and India, or which are the major countries in the Asia Pacific. For each of these, we probably will hear 10 minutes. And just quick word by myself, I'm the professor of energy economics and sustainability and University Technology Senior, as well as the president for the International Society for Energy Transition Studies, an organization which is devoted to promoting energy transition. Professor Du has mentioned that there should be a way to continue this conversation. I think a lot of forums like the ENG Society I'm set up and others are ready and should be able to work together to create a sustainable, affordable energy transition, not for developed countries, but for developed countries, and also look up to the underprivileged group which may suffer during the process. Without further ado, probably I hand over to the first presenter. As I mentioned that I unfortunately have a car breakdown, I probably have to rely on Dr. Duhan to help me to moderate the rest of the session. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Yeah. Dr. Duhan, hand back to you. I think Dr. Duhan probably couldn't hear me. Probably then we can invite the first speakers. Each speaker will be 10 minutes. Yeah. Well, why don't we start the first presentation while Duhan?
Okay, yeah, I can. Okay. Okay, I think we will, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Ms. Nian Go. She's the Executive Director of Vietnam Initiative for Energy Transition Social Enterprise. She has more than 30 years of experience working as an independent consultant. She's the Executive Director of Vietnam Initiative for Energy Transition Social Enterprise. Okay, the floor is yours, Ms. Nian.
Thank you, Dr. Han. So, good morning to everyone, and good afternoon for those in ASEAN. So, my presentation today will talk about the CO2 abatement scenario for the Vietnam power sector to 2030. So, my presentation will have 4 parts. Firstly, I will be giving some overview information on the Vietnam power system. And secondly, we will discuss about the national energy strategy policy and the abatement scenario. We call it like a fossil fuel abatement scenario and some recommendation about the Vietnam power system. As you see in the graph, we have rapidly development of the renewable energy since 2019 up to now, and we see that 56% come from up to now 56% of the installed capacity come from hydro, wind, and solar, and in total, Vietnam have more than 77 gigawatt installed capacity in 2021. we see that the power generation is mostly come from the coal power plant. It takes about 46%, and we have 30% electricity come from the hydropower, and the rest is 11% from the gas power plant, and more than 12% from the renewable energy. So the average annual growth of electricity demand in 2010 to 2015 is about 11% per year, and for the last 5 years, it was 7% per year. We have to considering the demand growth is a little bit decreased due to the COVID time. So when we look at the renewable energy growth, we see that the more renewable energy come to the system, is the more private share of the power resource increases. So we see into 2021, then the private sector occupied 42% of the total installed capacity power system in Vietnam, but the rest is depend on the EVN, Genco 1, 2, 3, and some power plant come from the PVN. Is also the state company. Is a PVN takeaway, or EVN is state company, and we have a 9% come from the BOT. So for the wind and solar development, up to January of 2021, we have 147 solar power plant equal to 8.87 gigawatt, and 104 rooftop solar system equal to 7.75 gigawatt. For the wind energy, we also have 84 wind power plant equal to 4.5 gigawatt. So we have a series of the feed-in tariff special for the solar and wind in Vietnam. So this kind of the policy mechanism support quite a lot for the wind and solar development in Vietnam in the last 4 years. But we also can see that the more we have renewable energy into the system, the more challenge we have. But it's the technical challenge, and we also can use new technology to fulfill and reduce the risk. For example, we have some issue with the transmission overload. We also have some issue on the low system inertia and forecasting errors. We know that the more renewable energy we into the system, the better forecasting is needed. So we see the generation forecasting errors is a big issue for the Vietnam's government, EVN, to balance the system. And we also can see the load forecast error is also bring quite a lot of difficulty for the grid planning. For the share of renewable energy in the total installed capacity is like equal to 25%. It creates a big challenge for the system operation. And we see the pricing mechanism is especially for the incentive for ancillary service are not yet attractive. So it makes the lack of the reserve for the renewable energy resource, like we do not have a incentive for the battery or storage system. So those are a big challenge for the development of the power system in Vietnam. I will come to the next slide on the national energy strategy and policy after the COP26. Then we see the big change of the power mix planning in Vietnam. However, we still see that the new solution is not yet in the place. For example, we see the coal power plant is still expected to have more than 12 gigawatt in the next 8 years. The domestic gas is increased up to 5.9 gigawatt, and there's a big hope for the imported LNG and hydrogen is about 23.9 gigawatt. So I think this is a very big challenge for Vietnam when we look at the fossil fuel expectation for the coming years. For the hydropower, we can see the government still expect that 6.8 gigawatt could be added in the system. And onshore wind is about 11.5 gigawatt. Offshore wind is going to be about 7 gigawatt. That's 0 gigawatt of the solar. So it is a very challenge because we know that the difficulty of the finance for the mechanism for the coal power plant and LNG will not really make this plan in can happen in reality. So we still need to, from our point of view, from the think tank point of view, we see we still need to have more solar come to the system in the next decade. Biomass, here the government is expect to have a 0.9 gigawatt, and for the pump storage, then it's going to be about 2.5 gigawatt. The flexibility source is about 0.15 gigawatt, and they also expected to be import electricity about 4.4 gigawatt. So we see the more expectation in the new power plant is being put into the fossil fuel quite a lot, even though the Prime Minister have been committed in the COP26 that the country will go in the direction of the net zero carbon in 2050. So we see that with this kind of draft of the PDP-8 plan, then we still have quite a lot of challenge to reduce the CO2 emission of the power sector in Vietnam. So when we look at the energy security, then we can see that in the plan, in the draft plan, then we see the more resource import used for the electricity generation. So it's about more than 40% gas and coal are imported to generate electricity. So it's quite rich when we look at the price of the LNG at the moment is increasing. And if the country is put a lot of hope on the LNG, then we may have a difficulty later on if we look at the point of view of the energy security point of view. So from our team, then we propose some scenarios for the fossil fuel abatement. So when we develop the scenario, we look at to ensure the energy security, affordable, better emission reduction, and so we call it CO2 abatement scenario for the power sector in Vietnam. We see that we use the draft of the PDP-8 as the power scenario, and then we develop 3 another scenario. We call it a blue. That means no new coal, but we move forward to the seaside, like we develop more on the LNG and offshore wind energy. The second scenario we call is the green scenario. In this scenario, we phase out the coal, and the last one is the energy efficiency. In this scenario, we really think about how to optimize the transition of the energy system in Vietnam, how to reduce the CO2 emission. In the same time, we also think quite a lot about the energy efficiency. So in these scenarios, and we can see that we from our team, we propose that for the blue scenario, then we can reduce about 10 gigawatt of the new coal power plant. We also can reduce the gas power plant. We increase the LNG, but not much, that only 3.1 gigawatt. For the oil, we reduce all the oil power plant existed. For the solar, then we reduce 13 gigawatt. This is a comparison to the power scenario. And for the wind energy, then we do not develop much. Actually, it's like we keep the existing plan from the government. So it's about like 11 gigawatt of onshore wind and 7 gigawatt of the offshore wind. Then we also like develop more waste on offshore wind energy, hydro and storage pump hydro. For the green and green scenarios, and we put all the hope on the solar, wind, and waste to energy and offshore wind energy. For the cyan energy, then we combination between the energy efficiency and renewable energy. So we see that here we propose to continue to develop 14 gigawatt of the solar, and then offshore wind, and it's about 10 gigawatt. And then we also propose to have a more hydro and storage pump hydro power. Once we complete the technical modeling of the scenario, then we also have a look at the eco-mix point of view. And we see that, firstly, we have been look at the investment of the ancillary activity to increase the system flexibility, including the grid upgrade. Then we look at the increase of the cost for the generator and community impact by the transition. The third step, we will have been look at the impact of the state budget and balance of the payment. And the last is we discuss about the requirement for the additional source. So the result from the economic support scenarios, course, they're going to see the cyan energy efficiency offers the most significant reduction of the total cost, with 16% saving compared to the power scenario. So we propose to the government that the government should consider the cyan energy efficiency as the scenario for the power development plans in Vietnam. We also have analyzed some issue related to the total investment of the power sector in Vietnam, and we see in overall the upfront of the investment cost for the old scenario are relatively similar and within 25%, and the realization make up about 75% of the total new generation investment cost for the scenarios. When we look at the job creating, then we can see the green and cyan energy efficiency scenario create the most job in the coming years. And of course, the scenario most employment is increased during the construction periods. More renewable energy generation in the green and cyan energy efficiency account for major increase of the construction job. And we also can see that the transmission and distribution creates at least 540,000 jobs per scenarios. So this is very promising on the job creating scenario for the next decade. So result of the modeling for the investment scenario of the power sector in Vietnam, we can see that the energy efficiency and demand side management need to increase at 1.5% up to 10% in 2030. And in 2045, it will be about 1.5% up to 16%. The electricity generated from the renewable energy resource will be increased about 54%, contribution from the 4% in 2020 to 28%. And in 2045, it's going to be about 60%. of the renewable energy contribution from the 4% in 2022 and 20 and 45%, 42%. The share of the generation from coal will be reduced from 30% to 30% from the 50% in 2020, and in 2045 it will be reduced 19.5% from 50% in 2020. The import dependency of the power system also reduced 20% and 42% from the power scenario. And in 2045, it's going to be about 25% to and 46% for power scenario. So the total investment cost for the power infrastructures and energy efficiency measure is about 155 billion USD in 2030 and 410 billion USD in 2045. So in general, we come up with some recommendation for the future power development in Vietnam. Firstly, is address the barrier of the clean technology is embedded subsidized for the fossil fuel and lack of curtailment protection for the various renewable energy. The energy efficiency could down by the demand of trajectory by 60% in 2045, such involve and balancing and flexibility capacity for the grid need to improve the flexibility of the existing infrastructures, especially hydro and coal, and additional new resource that's LNG, battery storage, demand side, and transmission and distribution need to upgrade substation as well. For the market solution, the emission trading system and integrated ASEAN power market is needed, and it needs to be considered seriously in the next decade. For the finance level, curtailment insurance for the renewable energy and capacity development in the domestic debt market need to be considering, and the finance mechanism for the coal to clean transition is need to have really like a big strategy from the government side to the development bank, and we think this kind of scenarios could be happen, and it needed for Vietnam to go further with the net zero carbon in 2050. So thank you everyone for your attention.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting presentation. Now, I'd like to introduce the second speaker, Ms. Contrice Riga. And Ms. Contrice Riga is a specialist in women economic empowerment. She has expertise on working with business, government, consulting firms, and NGOs. Now, please, Ms. Riga. Ms. Contrice Riga. And Ms. Contrice.
Thank you everyone for the opportunity to be able to share with you today about our study. So our study today that I'm going to feature is we're taking a one step below the national government of Indonesia. What I'm going to present to you today is about the local government actions in solar PV skill development to support the transitions of national energy in Indonesia. One case study that we're going to showcase here is a solar PV skill development in one of the most eastern province in Indonesia, which is Nusa Tenggara Timur. So a bit about the company, our company, we are an impact-driven company. We try out the off-grid solutions, trying to reach out the last mile user. And one of our current focus is on working at Sumba. And then our business model is we have the impact mindset work, and we have this participatory and inclusive knowledge sharing and productions, making sure that the last mile user that we are engaging with are also being part of the knowledge productions and the technology. A bit about Nusa Tenggara Timur. So in here you can see that this is the map of Indonesia, and this particular province here that being captured in a box, this is where Nusa Tenggara Timur located. So why it is important for us today to discuss about Nusa Tenggara Timur as a province in Indonesia. So Nusa Tenggara Timur is one of less developed economic-wise area compared to mainland Java, but NTT has a fast solar energy potential and is actually planned to be the solar energy barn, one of the key center of solar energy of Indonesia, because they have this very big irradiations focus in the area. And in here we can see some data here. It has a quite high electrifications ratio. However, our study finds that the electrifications ratio of the villages here also include the solar home systems, which focus only providing light for the community, not on providing the whole access of power to the community, which we also take into considerations that the solar home system contributions is also predicted to significantly decrease due to their limited 3 years forecasted lifetime. So we predict that although there is a high number here of electrification rate, it may decrease and is not well reflected of the whole access to electrifications ratio of power to the community in Nusa Tenggara Timur. And the ambitions to be the solar energy barn, of course, requiring a trained and locally available technicians for planning, installations, operations, and post-installation services. And one of the ways that the current government of Nusa Tenggara Timur can do and is currently implementing is to provide a nurture through vocational schools and training center, which the study today will unreveal and show what are the gaps and what are the recommendations for the government of Nusa Tenggara Timur in effort to support the national transitions to renewable energy. So in summary, the study today will provide an overview of the supply demand of solar PV in Nusa Tenggara Timur, where the data collections that we did last year is conducted via desk research, survey, interview, and focus group with key stakeholders in the market, government, and also from the vocational schools and training center. So a bit about the overview of solar PV in Indonesia and also in Nusa Tenggara Timur. At the national level, there is a concrete focus from the government to increase the renewable energy contributions to the national energy mix to 31% by 2030. And there is also a level of commitment at the provincial level, at the subnational level. And in here, you see those three things that are being mentioned. All these details of these regulations at the national and subnational level is available in the report. And I believe that the organizer have or will share with you today also the link to the full report for you to further peruse. And despite all the interest and also the concrete regulations that are being developed at both the national and also the subnational level, there are of course challenges that is happening in the development of solar PV in Nusa Tenggara Timur. There is still a strong dominance of fossil fuels. If you can see here also in the pie chart, 60% are still being dominated by non-solar, by diesel, by steam power plant and others, and only a small percentage of solar there, 1% only. And the other findings of challenge that we found through the study is that there is a low purchasing power, which is posing a biggest business risk so far for the market players, for the industry, because it has the potential to decrease or to slow down the growth of the renewable energy. And the third one is there is a lack of implementations of commitment at the subnational level, in this case in Nusa Tenggara Timur province. One of our study is that we conduct a mapping of supply chain of solar PV in Nusa Tenggara Timur. So we try through various study, we try to map where are the industry players are situated at now. So we conducted a survey and questionnaire and also key informant interview to get a primary data involving several companies that are currently or have plan to work in Nusa Tenggara Timur to develop the solar PV, and these are the seven stages that we developed based on previous study and also based on the research that we are doing. So just to make a note here, there are 7 stages, but we exclude the first stage because at this point, there are no institutions that are manufacturing or that are producing raw material in Nusa Tenggara Timur, because the study found that many of the company that is conducting works in Nusa Tenggara Timur are importing the equipment all from mainland Java or from overseas, such as China. So we are only covering stage 2 and 7 here. And what does the study findings told us? So when classified based on studies, most of the respondent of our supply chain industry player mentions that design solar PV system, construction installations, and O&M are the top 3 most conducted activities. However, further analysis of our study found that this is not reflected in the observation of local workers for this activity. So majority of the positions that are in the high level of positions are seated by non-local workers, and local workers are mainly employed in any positions that are requiring medium to low skill, such as welder, masons, and administrative personnel. And when we talk to the industry player there, we talk to resort, we talk to hotels, we talk to restaurant. They did indeed has a high interest of trialing the solar PV in helping the operational of their venue. However, they mentioned the major concern for them is the lack of locally based and reliable O&M institutions or company there to ensure that if in any case there is a malfunction, there is an error, there is a disruptions, there will be a reliable company that can help them manage all those problems. And we can also see, the other is that majority of the institutions, the respondent, currently mentioning that the absence of limited local regulations, and as I mentioned before, the low purchasing power from consumers to apply and to adopt and to buy the solar PV technology are two main challenges that limit them to work further in Nusa Tenggara Timur in developing the solar PV. And the two other findings on the supply chains is the industry feels like there is limited human resources, particularly the local one in Nusa Tenggara Timur, and our study on analysis on the demographic also shows that it is unfortunate that the province that does not experience a demographic bonus. So this is also a factor in why there is a lack of supply, reliable supply for solar PV skills in Nusa Tenggara Timur. And lastly, of course, there is a lack of technical knowledge and local resource capacity for solar energy development in Nusa Tenggara Timur. So this is also unemployment estimates in solar PV development in NTT. We see here based on those two highest most activities done regarding to PV development in solar in NTT. We see there is a high for case job, particularly in the next 1 year, because of there is an increasing attention now by the government at both the national and subnational level. So there will be a lot of need of annual job in solar PV constructions and OM in entity in 10 years, in the period of 10 years. A detail of these calculations and also further details on the annual jobs provided per activities per work development stage is available in the report. So in the interest of time, I will only take a summary of it, which is what I'm presenting now. And one of the finding, the analysis that we are doing is to analyze what does the supply demand gap looks like in solar PV development in NTT now. So one of the big findings shows that there is a mismatch in the human resource competency that do not meet the needs of vocational educations and also, of course, the industrial needs. So we see here the supply is the human resource skills, people that are going to work in the solar PV related job, and the demand is, of course, the vacancy, the job that is available provided by the industry in relations to solar PV development. In a nutshell, our study shows that are two big emerging issues related to human resource in the PV industry in Nusa Tenggara Timur. The first one is, of course, as I mentioned before, there is a big gap between skills and industry needs. So only 22% of all the populations of Nusa Tenggara Timur currently, or in the last 1 year when the study is conducted, only 22% graduated from senior high school and 30% from university. So this low number has an impact of the productivity and competitiveness of the workforce, which is relatively low. Therefore, further recommendations by the government for the government is to strengthen the support for skill development through training centers, through vocational schools, which is provided in the next slide. And then the last one is on the mismatch. So we found that there is a mismatch of the educations and skills possessed by the workforce is not matching the needs of the industry. So as if we recall earlier, there is a positions opening at the higher level for manager and also for engineer at the ground level. However, those are not yet filled. Hence, the high probability it is being filled by workers that is come from outside Nusa Tenggara Timur and leaving the local workers behind those positions. So this kind of mismatch between the skills and also the needs of the industry, causing, of course, the difficulties not only for the industry but also for the local quality workers, because there is high quality there, but there still needs some gains to step up to ensure that they're able to fulfill the quality needed by the company. And the top recommendations from our study, I'm being aware of time, so we are selecting the top recommendations. There are a list of recommendations in the full report if you would like to further peruse on the report. However, the three here that we would like to highlight in discussions is about how the government of NTT, it will be great for the government of NTT to consider the skill development of prospective workers to adjust with the market demands. So one way to do that is the provincial government to curate the content of the learning curriculum, which is under the Department of Educations of this at the subnational level, and make sure that the content of learning in vocational schools and training centers is aligning with the skills that is related to the plant machines operator, electricians, and technicians. So the study also further mentions that NTT currently has a significant number of off-grid and distributed systems across those islands. So related skills may be needed now in the next 5 or 10 years on relation to the off-grid and distributed systems. So that could be one of the main content to be included in the learning curricula. Another trend is, of course, solar rooftop. And also the solar street lighting. However, we also note here that the adoption of the lack of market players in Nusa Tenggara Timur hinder the adoptions of these solutions by potential customer. So one way to address this is for the local, the provincial government to focus not only on adopting solar rooftop, but also to ensure tenders are available for O&M companies to make sure that there is space given to O&M companies to grow and nurture to be a reliable O&M company, addressing the needs, addressing the worry of the potential customer that is based in Nusa Tenggara Timur. And the other things that we can recommend for the government, as this is among the first few years of adoptions on solar rooftops in Nusa Tenggara Timur, we based on the study, we think it is a wise move for the local government to regulate provisions of incentive on solar rooftop adoption. So it's to customer. So to encourage the urban communities, for example, in housing or industries, small offices to adopt solar rooftops. And lastly, the training on solar PV targeting industries such as hotel, resort, property, and agents and others is crucial for the development of solar PV in Nusa Tenggara Timur. Why? Because the tourism in Nusa Tenggara Timur is one of the leading highlight of those islands. The islands has a lot of beautiful beaches, a lot of beautiful hills, and there's a growing intention from the travelers to go there. So hotel, resort, property is having an increasing value in both numbers and also in occupancy rate. But of course, it stalled when COVID is happening. So the hope now, assuming that COVID is being the restriction is being loose, the recommendations for the government is to make sure that there is a training given to the industry so that they can try to operate that at their own premises. They are highly interested. However, they also have lack of knowledge and skills, lack of skills in installations, and also, the presence of O&M company, as I mentioned earlier. So in a nutshell, our study found that if the government of Nusa Tenggara Timur as the subnational level want to support the national government effort, what they can do is to support through the skills development of their local human resource. There is an opportunity to develop solar PV there, and then to make sure that there is an appropriate number of supply and quality workers, locally based one, will be superior in ensuring that the transitions to renewable energy by involving the local workers are there and interact with the effort by the government at national and also at the provincial level. I think that is all so far for my presentations. Thank you so much. I welcome any feedback. I welcome any opinion, any suggestions to helping us build a better study and a better technology for our last mile user in Nusa Tenggara Timur, Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rega. Now let me introduce our last speaker, Ms. Swati Rezada. Ms. Swati is a policy advisor in International Institute for Sustainable Development. Her experience centers on the fields of regulatory governance, project finance, and policy advocacy. So please welcome Ms. Swati.
Thank you, Dr. Han. Could I request the previous speaker to stop sharing their screen?
Oh, okay. Sorry. I think I already stopped my screen share.
Previous speaker to stop sharing their screen.
Oh.
Thank you. Okay, so good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, everyone who's joined us today. And thank you, ASEF, for providing me the opportunity to speak on this very interesting topic. So by way of introduction, my name is Swasti. I am a policy advisor of energy at the International Institute for Sustainable Development. We are an international think tank that works on providing practical solutions to the growing challenges and opportunities of integrating environmental and social priorities with economic development. IISD also acts as the secretariat of the Global Subsidies Initiative, which is an initiative that promotes transparency on the nature and size of energy subsidies, evaluating the economic, social, and environmental impacts of energy subsidies, and where necessary, advising on how inefficient and wasteful subsidies can best be reformed. IISD also acts So as IISD, we recently came out with a publication along with our partners in another think tank called the Council on Energy, Environment and Water recently, called Mapping India's Energy Policy 2022, Aligning Support and Revenues with a Net Zero Future. And I'll request Michelle to drop in the link for the report in case you're interested in exploring it further. This report is actually one of the flagship publications of IISD, which is also a part of a series of publications that we've been leading in the past. So historically, our work has focused on mapping energy subsidies, but this year we've sort of broadened the scope of the study to also encompass broader government support around fossil fuels and clean energy. And also, it also covers revenues and energy externalities. That's a new addition. So in terms of where India is and what are the long-term targets that we are looking at, India has had a really interesting journey in terms of clean energy transition. It overall has a really positive story that for developing countries especially. And in the last year's COP, India did update its climate commitments with a really progressive statement, which states that one of the targets which states that in the medium term, India aims to install 500 gigawatt of non-fossil power capacity, which is a target for 2030. And we also have a long-term target of becoming net zero by 2070. So now that this sort of broad stage has been set for India in terms of its targets, the key question therefore then becomes what is the kind of government support or public support that is currently being provided to different energy sources and whether it is aligned to these key objectives. What public revenue is currently being raised from these energy sources. So whether there's a dependency of this revenue on fossil fuels and whether that's going to change as the country moves from this current energy mix. And what does this broadly imply for the net zero pathway? And the study looks at all these three questions and has some very interesting findings. So I'll quickly touch upon some of our key high-level findings and then get into the recommendations bit for the government. So in terms of government support, we sort of look at three broad pillars. One is energy subsidies, which has been like a focus area for the last few years for ISD and CEW. But we've also sort of expanded, as I previously mentioned, around what are the kind of state-owned enterprise and capital investments that are going into energy projects. So PSU that you see on the slide is basically an abbreviation that is equivalent for state-owned enterprises in India. And the country does have a lot of SOEs that are currently operating and own a majority of the market share when it comes to energy projects. So therefore, the kind of support that the government provides through these SOEs also becomes an important area to study. The third piece is also, again, India does have a really huge network of public sector banks and also non-banking financial companies that are broadly bucketed into public finance institutions. So we also looked at what is the kind of disbursements and debt financing that is being provided through these public sector institutions in the country. And as it stands today, in terms of the high level messaging, there does seem to be like a higher support for fossil fuel based projects across the three, which again shows that even today, despite like the momentum that we've seen in clean energy in India, we are still a very fossil fuel embedded economy. So it's going to be challenging, and there needs to be more research in terms of what the future holds. While government support is important, it is also important to understand what is the kind of dependence of government revenue on fossil fuels and the kind of tax and non-tax measures that are currently being used by the government. So this study also delves into that. And then alongside, because revenue can be seen as a broader benefit to the society, which is then used for welfare schemes, etc., it also then becomes important to study what are the kind of energy externalities associated with each of those fuel types. So the study also covers that. In terms of high-level messaging, $77 billion is currently being provided in the form of public support, which is again like a huge amount. So therefore, it becomes important and critical as to how the government really directs this amount. In terms of independent findings on each of those pillars, when we looked at energy subsidies, we basically discovered that fossil fuel subsidies overall have fallen in India. So there is a positive story there, but they're still 9 times more than clean energy. And this is primarily because renewable energy in the form of utility scale solar and wind are now cost competitive, even cheaper in some areas, and that therefore then becomes like one of the reasons why, for example, subsidies have really fallen, along with the reasons of pandemic in FY20 and FY21. So there was a slowdown in terms of deployment, which is also why clean energy subsidies did fall in FY21. In terms of other subsidies, the green that you see on the graph on the right-hand side, India does have a high chunk of low-priced electricity. And as the country adds more households to the grid, along with high reliable electricity, it means that more and more electrons are going to flow through the grid, and therefore that adds more pressure to low price electricity and overall transmission and distribution subsidies as well. So this still, because they hold a major chunk of energy subsidies, reforming this becomes very critical. India has subsidies for agricultural consumers along with residential consumers up to a particular tariff slab. So that's also one big piece. RE subsidies, as I mentioned, have fallen. So there can be more impetus going forward as India looks at high targets in terms of the ambition. Interestingly, India did have LPG subsidies as well, but they were removed in FY21 and then reintroduced earlier this year for the poor. PMUY is basically a scheme that is run for a particular set of consumers, and India did implement a really interesting scheme to bring more and more consumers into the ambit of LPG. And during COVID pandemic, it was increasingly being seen that these consumers cannot continue to afford the pricing because it was a one-time connection subsidy. The government has sort of reintroduced this in the short term to provide a sort of a cushion during post-pandemic. So it's also a sort of a safety net. In terms of the state-owned enterprises, as I mentioned, there are a lot of organizations working towards the goal of energy security and also providing safe, affordable, and accessible energy to all in India. And we have 7 what are called Maharatnas in India across energy types, which is coal, oil and gas, and electricity. So if we looked at basically the capital investments being made by these 14 energy PSUs, 7 of which are on the slide, and we found that almost 1.4 lakh crores were disbursed in FY21. Interestingly, even today, some PSUs or SOEs in India have declared some operational net zero targets, which basically means they have some sort of scope 1, scope 2 emission targets, but none of them have come out with a holistic net zero plan which covers scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. So there is again like a lot of room in terms of the ministry is really pushing this as a guideline for SOEs to then pick up and sort of have a roadmap that aligns to the broader national targets as well. We also looked at the vision and mission statement of most of these SOEs, and we found that most of them lack reflect the ambition that is out in terms of the national targets. So again, like a lot more can be done here. In terms of public finance institutions, again, interestingly, we studied 12 public sector banks and 3 NBFCs, which are mainly like the power financiers in the country. And from the research, we found that most of these institutions already have high exposure, almost greater than 5% credit exposure to energy infrastructure projects, which also sort of points to the kind of carbon lock-in that they currently face, which constrains sort of the appetite to take higher risks and also invest in RE projects. Further, public finance institutions also have certain capacity constraints in terms of being able to evaluate RE projects, so that then also becomes a constraint to disburse further lending to these to energy projects. So that also then therefore acts as a bottleneck. There is also a lot that can be done in terms of improving data transparency here, which was again like a finding of the study. The study has mostly relied on Basel III disclosures of banks, along with the annual disclosures being made by other financial institutions. Interestingly, Government of India has also recently announced using sovereign green bonds to mobilize resources for a green energy transition, especially in public sector projects. And that is expected to sort of open up the kind of credit that will be available for RE projects. And there's more to follow on this. The guidelines are yet to come out, but this is also increasingly being seen as a positive step in this direction. In terms of energy revenues, another great finding here. So we looked at both the center and state revenues, and energy revenue accounts for almost 17% of all government revenue. So it is one of the major sectors that also contributes to the government revenue, and 83% of this today is tied to oil and gas, with almost 2 taxes per se accounting for 3/4 of the revenue from oil and gas. So again, it also shows what is the kind of dependence of the kind of government public support that can be provided through these taxes if the country transitions to a clean energy future. So there is a huge dependence on fossil fuels today in terms of the revenue that can be realized. Interestingly, we also undertook a study to sort of project what will be the future of this oil-linked or fossil-linked revenue for India. So going forward, because of the fluctuating oil prices and high dependence on imports in India, there is going to be high volatility risk. So that again becomes like a really big area for the government to sort of like think about, because that can lead to again a lot of capacity constraints in terms of spending on welfare schemes. So it can vary up to from 4 to 48 billion USD, which is again like a huge range to sort of help and feed into the planning mechanisms for the government. Again, as I mentioned, while we understand revenues can be seen as benefits, so therefore we also sort of wanted to look at what are the costs associated with, taxing fossil fuels in the economy. And while we understand externalities can be extremely tricky to work with, because there are methodology issues, there are multiple studies that have different statistical ways to approach this. We sort of took a step back and decided to take a conservative approach in terms of what, if we look at some of the basic externalities, how does that compare with the kind of revenues that the government is able to raise. And it seems that even with a conservative estimate where we looked at air pollution as one of the externalities, climate change effects, etc., even with that conservative estimate, we found that the kind of energy externalities associated with fossil fuel was much, much higher, almost in the range of 500 billion if we take like a slightly less conservative approach. Which is again like a real big finding that that then becomes like an added social cost to the society. In terms of recommendations for the government, there are 3 big bold recommendations that we've come out with in the study. One is so in India, electricity is a concurrent subject, which basically means that there are certain areas that the states sort of formulate on, and then there are certain areas which the center sort of provides guidelines on. So therefore, if the country needs to achieve that net zero roadmap of 2070, we sort of need to institutionalize the center state coordination on energy. Currently, this is currently energy is operated through multiple ministries and departments across the country, which also then becomes like a massive planning exercise, and with a lot of transaction costs involved. So again, there's an emerging need to sort of establish a body to coordinate these support measures, especially around subsidies, taxes, and externalities, so that there can be like a coherent thinking around this topic. In terms of the second big recommendation, we're suggesting that as I mentioned through our findings, there is a lot of scope in terms of aligning support, taxation, and energy pricing with the 2030 targets, because we still see a lot more support, be it subsidies, be it investments through state-owned enterprises or the public finance institutions. In case of this overall support, we continue to see like a lot more incentives for fossil fuel linked technologies. So therefore there needs to be more alignment in terms of what the 2030 target really is trying to aim at. And then there is a role for the ministries and regulators here, which is around mandating some of the SOEs and PFIs to establish their own net roadmaps that sort of align with the national targets, so that that can then be translated at an operational level within these organizations, and they can become actors in the clean energy transition. And then the last piece, which is again like a very interesting piece from the revenues and externalities bit that we did, was the government needs to really think strategically about using taxation, including tax and non-tax measures, because as the energy transition really rolls out, there's going to be higher volatility around fossil revenues linked to volatility in oil and gas pricing. And because India is expected to continue to remain import dependent for some time now, it is important that we set aside some of these periods of super profits or low oil prices globally, so that can then be used in terms of building the kind of public support that is then needed for clean energy transition. And then the last important piece is India does have today an implicit carbon tax, but we still don't have an explicit one. So as the country moves towards a net zero pathway, within the broader roadmap, there also needs to be an articulation from the government in terms of what is the explicit role of the carbon tax, and how can that really sort of channelize the kind of transition that is needed. So with that, I'll come to an end to my sort of download on some of the key findings of the report. We are currently engaging a lot with researchers, the government, as well as businesses through social media. So feel free to reach out to us on Twitter, LinkedIn. We've also dropped the link to our interactive database. So since this is a transparency initiative, all this data is available for exploring, for further exploration by researchers. So you can visit the Global Subsidies Initiative page and sort of play around with the data sets also if you're interested in exploring further. So I think that's basically the end of this presentation. My email ID is on the screen. So if you're interested in learning more about our study, feel free to reach out. And with that, I think I'll hand it over back to Dr. Han. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. I'm aware that we are a bit running late, but let's move on to the panel discussion. We have 3 speakers and we have another panelist. First, please allow me to introduce the 4th panelist, Mr. Zhang Liu Tong. He is the director of Water Rock Energy Economics. He has 15 years experience providing advisory services on power and gas market in Southeast Asia and the Greater China regions. So please, Mr. Zhang, please, if you want to say something.
Yeah, I think because thanks for the introduction, Dr. Dor. I think I will be very brief because we are short time. I think for us, we basically, like what Dr. Dor just mentioned, we more or less focusing on the Southeast Asians and also the Greater China region markets. And some of the observation that we have more or less see in the past 1 or 2 years in 3 of the markets, basically Singapore, China, and the Philippines. In the Singapore market is a relatively unique market, mainly because Singapore don't really has a lot of local renewable resources because it's there's very limited length for them to build up their solar capacity. So Singapore has, in order to achieve net carbon zero, they basically very much try to import green power from other Asian countries. And in the medium and long term, they will very likely use hydrogens and potentially also trying to export carbon dioxide out of Singapore to be stored using carbon capture and storage in other countries. So, but I mean the roadmap for Singapore to get to net carbon zero is quite clear, but implementation-wise, there's actually a lot of challenges. I mean, if people have questions on the implementation challenges, we can definitely talk more about that. For China, there's also, I mean, their net carbon zero roadmap is relatively clear as well. I mean, for China, the key challenge is more like the resource endowments in different regions in China is very, very different. So for now, they're encouraging people to build mega wind solar projects in the inland provinces and then export those green power to the coastal areas through the ultra high voltage lines. At the same time, the penetration is quite high in China already, so they're also requiring people to build battery energy storage. They're also trying to build up hydrogen's value chain in some of the areas. So if people interested in those, we can talk about more of those as well. For the market base, basically they're also trying to come out with the green trading scheme, basically trying to make sure that at least the clean attributes of green power more or less can be monetized by the renewable capacity. Yeah, and then for the Philippines, it's also quite an interesting market, partly because Philippines is a developing country, but it's very much a competitive electricity market. It's very much deregulated, no subsidies. So I mean, the government doesn't really has a big role to play in investments. Investment is very much driven by the private sector. So what the government can do is very much, for now, they're very much trying to implement the renewable portfolio standards. So requiring the distribution utility and the electric cooperative to procure higher percentage of renewable energy. But for the Philippines, there's a lot of small electric cooperatives, so they can't really procure. They don't really has a lot of capability to procure green power. So the government now are implementing the green energy auction plans to try to help people procure those green power. But of course, there are also other very much a lot of implementation challenges in the Philippines. And but I think the direction is actually relatively good. Yeah, maybe let me just stop here. I think if people have questions about on those three countries, I'm more than happy to address those.
Thank you very much. This is a big subject, but I think we got some questions from the audience. One is for the Vietnam market. Is Vietnam considering the utilization of CFPP with abatement CO2 strategies? Ms. Neil.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I think the CFPP is actually the, I consider it's a coal-fired requirement, right? And So I think it's called coal-fired power plant retirement policy. So I think for Vietnam, we really need to have this kind of policy, and we see that there's a lot of the activity have been done in the government side to see where are the solution and what are the coal power plant that we can apply for this new mechanism. And we also can see the ADB is working actively to propose this kind of mechanism to the government in Vietnam. And we, as one of the think tank who are doing, we have been the CO2 abatement scenarios for the power sector in Vietnam. We see the government is concerned about this, and they going to have some policy strategy for this mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. But there is another question regarding Vietnam. Is there any phase-out policy strategy for coal, oil? Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Up to now, there is no, there is not yet phase-out policy or strategy for the coal and oil. But we see that potentially the government will have a regulation for the carbon market, and based on that, they would have some policy for the phase out of the fossil fuel power system later on.
Thank you. Now I actually have a question listening to the situation in India. It looks like that the public sector in India has been investing in fossil fuel for a long time and continue to do so. It reminds me of China some times ago. There was a time that they were building many coal-fired power stations for some period of time. So this is a question of the government or the people of India are taking development first. Maybe if we see what China is doing, they are more active in carbon neutral renewable energy sort of activity. So I want to ask Mr. Swasti and also Mr. Zhang about your thoughts, please. Who want to go first?
I can come first and probably be very short because I know we are short on time. So I agree with you, Dr. Han, in terms of some parallels with China. And there is definitely a development imperative because as the country transitions, I think that this is one of those periods when there is a sort of a clear trade-off between development, energy security, and affordability, which is I think if I could use and borrow some of the metrics, for example, that I think Neen used. So So I mean, that is very true for India today. But the country is looking at, for example, ways to sort of either repurpose coal plants, and that's an increasingly important discussion that the government is now opening up. But we are also seeing a lot more pushback in terms of what does that mean in terms of just transition, because there are most of the coal regions in India are some of the most backward areas as well. So that also means, a whole issue of how do you really like ensure that some of those communities have a safety net and something to fall back on, while you build out those training programs through those state-owned enterprises that are also looking to transition. So Coal India Limited, for example, is one of the biggest coal miners across the world, and it's an Indian public sector undertaking. So, for example, how do these corporations, which are so big in size and are also contributing to ensuring that currently everybody has affordable electricity, that will need to come out through a net zero roadmap, and which has to be like a strategic planning at the highest level, and that then needs to operationalize through your business plans, through your subsidiaries that are operating in this field and all of that. So I mean, I think which is why this is a more strategic debate for state-owned enterprises. And interestingly, IISG, our institute, is also working towards this goal. So we are actually also looking at how, for example, what does that 2050 energy outlook for India really translate for these state-owned enterprises, and what are the kind of financial risks, which includes like physical risk or transition risks, and that therefore then becomes like a conversation to have with some of those entities, because that is a clear incentive to then transition. And there are certain pilots that are currently being undertaken by most of the entities that I talked about. There is a growing consensus that this needs to happen, but financing is one of the major gaps. So I think, which is why, for example, like PFIs then become important. So if they are able to step up and provide for that kind of financing gap that currently exists and make some of these projects bankable, then there is a clear financial incentive also to transition. So that would be my quick reaction.
Yeah, I think I can just quickly add on to that on the status of coal builds in China. I think it's similar to some of the points that Swasti just mentioned. Basically, it is actually quite a relatively complicated issue, especially in the past few months. Energy security has become sort of a more focused topics in China, I think, and in many other countries as well. And for China's perspective, basically, I mean, most of their coal is produced domestically, so they do see that basically coal-fired power capacity provide a higher levels of energy security, at least in the near and medium term. So there has been seems to be some pickup on new coal construction activity in some of the inland provinces. But the problem very much is more like the profitability of new coal builds is actually very, very bad in China. We've talked to a lot of state-owned companies. They're actually not really interested to build those new capacity. To some extent, it's actually more like forced by some of the provincial governments and some of the people to basically in order to to make sure that they have sufficient capacity. At least the current regulatory setup from the central governments is very much it's not very conducive for new coal capacity investments. For renewable energy, the central government actually have come up with quite a number of initiatives basically to help increase the returns for some of the renewable projects, and at least even for the state-owned companies, they used to be very interested to build mega coal projects. A lot of them are actually shifting to be more focusing on building mega wind and mega solar project with battery energy storage. So I think the regulatory setup itself probably will be able to help shift the focus of building coal towards renewable. But in the near term, there is still the capacity will probably not really reduce. They will probably have some small uptick in the next five years in China for new coal capacity.
Okay, our time is up. So thank you very much for all the speakers and our panelists. And thank you for everyone to participate in this session. Now we close this session. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Okay, thanks.